To give some background information, this event occurred a little over a year ago, and I still haven't been able to even begin to get over it. I'm a 22-year-old, 5'4" female, and at the time I was 21. My family and I had recently moved to a new town that was a fair amount more rural than the town I had previously lived in, and our new home was a large ranch-style house with a basement. I was home from college, and my parents had left for the week to celebrate their wedding anniversary with their friends who lived several hours away. Before I continue, I'll give a quick layout of the house so that you'll be able to imagine the setting a bit more clearly. There were 3 doors which led into the house. One on the front porch, a sliding glass door on the back porch, and another door on the other side of the wall from my bedroom, which led into the garage and basement. When you walk out of the bedroom and turn, you can see all the way across the house, kitchen, living room, dining area, to the door of my parents' bedroom and the stairs leading up from the basement. It had been a couple of days since my parents left, and I hadn't had any problems. They had sent me a couple messages on Facebook letting me know they had arrived to their friend's house safely and were having a good time. The day had gone well, and I was sure to check that I'd locked all the doors of the house once the sun started going down. It was about 11 p.m., and I was doing my nightly routine of laying in bed and messaging around on the computer when I suddenly got this sinking feeling of dread. I felt as if I was being watched. It was summer and we didn't have AC, so I had a large box fan in the window blowing the cool night air into my stiffly hot room. But once that feeling settled over me, I decided I should remove the fan and close the window, just in case. Once removing the fan, shutting and locking the window, and pulling down the curtain, I felt a bit better. However, I still couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I lay back in bed and tried to continue what I was doing, though I didn't put my headphones back on. After a few minutes, I began to hear something that sounded like light scratching. I sat still in bed, listening to the sound, trying to pinpoint what it was if I recognized it at all. Our new house, although relatively close in distance to our neighbors, had a fair amount of forest around it, so I thought the scratching may have been an animal or someone's dog that got loose and wanted to come inside. After a few minutes, the scratching stopped and everything returned to silence. So I figured that I was probably right and that it must have been an animal or something. My relief was short-lived. As soon after the scratching stopped, from the other side of the wall I began to hear slow footsteps descending into the basement. This is when I knew I was completely fucked. There was no way I could get out of the house without walking past the basement stairs. We didn't have a house phone, and at the time I was in the process of getting a new cell phone because mine was broken beyond repair. I sat there for a few seconds wondering what the hell I should do. I knew that I would need to get out of the house as soon as possible, and that the more time I wasted, the worse it would be for me. I contemplated popping the screen out of the bedroom window and jumping out, but it was far enough off the ground that there was a good chance I would end up getting hurt if I did. Not to mention that if I jumped out of the window and hurt myself, I wouldn't be able to run for help, and I would be right next to the door that whoever was in my house had gone through. So, I decided to very carefully and quietly open my door and peek out around the corner, and if the coast was clear, I would make a mad dash for the front door and sprint to my neighbor's house. I very slowly opened my bedroom door, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness of the house before creeping around the corner and looking to see if I was safe to make a run for it. What I saw nearly made me vomit. As my eyes scanned the house, I noticed something was off. I squinted hard as I looked over at the basement stairs and was able to make out the shape of a man. What made it worse He wasn't just standing at the top of the stairs. He was fucking crawling up them like some kind of nightmare creature. I quickly backed out into my room again, and shutting and locking the door as quietly as I could. I didn't think he'd seen me, but there was no way that I was going to make a run for it now. My only choice was to pop the screen and jump out the window. As I was unlocking and opening my window, I heard the handle to my bedroom door turn. Once the man realized that it was locked, in a sickening, sweet, sing-song voice, he cooed,
"I know you're in there."
This was followed by a loud cackle, and what I can only imagine was him throwing himself at full force against my door. I ripped the screen out of the window and flung myself out. I landed wrong on my right foot, and I was sure that I'd hurt my ankle, but at the time I couldn't think of anything other than getting as far away as possible. I got up and ran as fast as I could to my neighbor's house, knocking on their door in a panicked frenzy and ringing the bell over and over. I looked over at my house as I was yelling for my neighbors to let me in, and I swear to fucking God, I could see the man standing at my window, waving at me. My neighbors finally opened the door after what I felt like forever, and I managed to explain well enough what was going on for them to let me in and call the police. I stayed with them until the police arrived. The police searched my house and found that the lock to the basement had been picked, and the door to my bedroom was hanging off the hinges. They weren't able to find the man anywhere, and because I had only seen him for a split second in the dark, I couldn't provide them with a good description of him. Of course, I get into contact with my parents immediately, and they hurry home. The police took my statement and searched the area for the man, but of course they came up with nothing. After this event, my parents and I were sure to add deadbolt locks to the door leading into the basement and to the door leading out of the basement to the rest of the house. They also helped me pay to get a new phone. What really bothers me about all of this is that nothing was stolen. There wasn't even any evidence that the guy had looked through anything while he had been in my house. This happened back in the summer of 9th grade. I was invited to a sleepover at this kid named Jacob's house. Jacob had this reputation for having a bad family and just being weird and awkward himself. He was in my math class, and I was partnered up with him for a project where I helped to boost his mark, so I guess he sort of warmed up to me. For his birthday, he held a sleepover and invited 3 other kids and I to come over. I didn't really want to go, but I told my friends about the invitation, and they convinced me to just go, saying that it would be fun and that I would figure out what kind of guy Jacob really was. I was hyped up by my friends and decided to go after all. So I was dropped off by my mom, and when I stepped onto the porch, I realized that the doorbell looked broken, like the rectangular case that covered the wiring and stuff was shattered. I had a sudden fear of being electrocuted, so I went to knock instead. Just as I raised my fist, I noticed some muffled shouting from within the house, loud enough to be heard over the hum of my mom's car engine. The shouting kind of alarmed me, and I turned to look at the car, which was waiting for me to enter the house. I started having second thoughts of staying, but the idea of looking like a coward in front of my friends motivated me to knock loudly. The shouting cut abruptly, so abruptly that I thought that they were just watching TV or something, and muted it when I knocked. The door suddenly swung open, and I was expecting a huge looming figure to be towering over me, but all I saw was a skinny, pale Jacob. His face brightened when he saw me, and he ushered me in. I waved to my mom and watched her back out of the driveway and down the road. I peered into the house, but from the entrance, I could only see the living room, a staircase, and a hallway, all 3 areas were empty, but I saw the flickering light of a TV from the turn of the hall. Jacob took me upstairs into the very last room. It was an extraordinarily clean room, with a dresser and a bed pushed together into the corner, and an analog clock hanging from the wall, leaving a lot of room completely empty. To my dismay, I was the first one there. I thought of how awkward it would be if no one else showed up, and that thought made me panic a bit. I sat down on the carpet and pulled my iPod Touch out of my backpack, asking Jacob to insert his Wi-Fi password. He took my iPod and fiddled around with it for at least 5 minutes. Each minute grew longer and more awkward, until I asked, "Did you forget the password?" Jacob bit his lip. Then the doorbell rang. I jumped to my feet and told him, "I'll get it. You just try and remember the password." I hurried down the stairs and opened the front door, where I saw a kid I didn't know very well. I only knew he was in our grade. I showed him upstairs, telling him, "Oh, I'm glad you came. I thought I was going to be the only one." To which he said, "I wouldn't have come if my mother didn't make me." We walked into the room, and I noticed Jacob wasn't in it. I didn't think much of it, and took the opportunity to get familiar with the other dude. He told me that his name was Lance, and he had once helped Jacob by giving him a few extra dollars to buy his lunch, and he didn't think Jacob would remember him. We both talked about the rumors about Jacob, and whether he actually had bad parents or if he was just going through a phase. At some points, we heard loud thuds downstairs, to which we'd shut up and widen our eyes to each other. The thudding would stop, and after a few moments we could continue chatting. I told him about the shouting, but how it could have just been the television. Lance shook his head and said that he once saw Jacob with his parents in the grocery store, and they had been arguing then too. At this point, I was glad I came because I started to pity Jacob, and that's when he entered the room. "Sorry I'm late," he said, sounding out of breath. "I was trying to get the Wi-Fi password, but it's down right now. The Wi-Fi. Sorry." I told him it was okay, took my iPod from him, and told him that there was always something else we could do. We all waited for the other 2 boys that Jacob invited to come. It started to become apparent that they wouldn't, and I made up excuses for the both of them after I saw the crestfallen look on Jacob's face. We awkwardly chatted for a bit, ate some chips, and talked about our schedules and stuff for grade 10. He told us he would be moving away before September, and Lance and I asked normal questions to keep the conversation going. Then, after the small talk got tiring, we agreed to fall asleep early. We all brushed our teeth and changed. Then Jacob went to his bed, while Lance and I slept on the floor in our sleeping bags. After trying to sleep for what I'd say was about 15 minutes, I just grabbed my iPod, turned the brightness down, and started scrolling through it. After I got bored with the games and such, I went to my messages and decided to read back on some conversation with friends. That's when I noticed that on the top, where newly messaged people were, was an unknown number. Confused, I pressed on it and was horrified to see that a bunch of pictures that I had took of my friends and myself were sent to this number from my camera roll, and all of them read delivered, which meant I was connected to a source of internet for these to be sent. I could only think of Jacob as the culprit, and I got really freaked out because he had just sent my pictures to somebody, and I didn't remember Jacob ever having a phone. I didn't know what to do, so I shook Lance awake, keeping my eyes on Jacob's still form. It took Lance forever, but I managed to make him turn around and look at me through bleary eyes. In a whisper, I asked, "Can you come to the washroom with me?" Lance groaned and turned back around, muttering, "Don't be a pussy." I shook him violently and told him that he needed to come with me, and I annoyed him so much that he pushed himself out of his sleeping bag and hit me hard in the arm. I was so panicked I didn't care, and I dragged him out of the room, opening every door in the hallway slowly until I found the washroom. I shoved him in and locked the door, and he looked seriously freaked out. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked angrily, and I showed him my messages and explained the situation. He told me I must have butt sent it, but I told him that it was an iPod and I couldn't have sent anything without Wi-Fi. Lance's angry look had shifted to looking nervously excited now, and he assured me that I was overreacting. We can call the number on my phone if you want," he said, and I thought that was a good idea. So Lance turned on his cellular data and dialed the number displayed on my messages. The ringing started a bit late, and then we heard the music of an incoming call coming in from one of the other rooms. It took us a second for us to realize this, and when we did, we both went into a flurry of shocked nervousness. Lance muted the ringing on his phone and tiptoed out of the bathroom. We heard the ringing coming from one of the other bedrooms as we tiptoed down the corridor, and we both shared a terrified look. When we went back into Jacob's room, he was sitting up in his bed and scratching his head. Lance quickly ended the call and nudged me, like I should have confronted him or something. Jacob asked us why we were awake, and Lance just looked at me, expecting me to answer. I told Jacob that I had to go to the bathroom, and Lance was already awake, so I took him along. Jacob just kind of sat there, so Lance and I curled back into our sleeping bags. Neither Lance nor I actually slept. We just turned our backs on each other and laid there, breathing heavily, uncertain of what to do about this situation. Oddly enough, I drifted off to sleep and was awoken by Lance early in the morning. He let me call my mom and asked her to pick me and Lance up since Lance didn't have a ride that early in the morning. We told Jacob goodbye and thanks for inviting us over and all that. I really wanted to say something about the messages to him, but I was really creeped out and didn't want to make the whole thing awkward. He did move late August, and I never told my parents about this, only my friends. This happened 3 years ago. I now have this weird paranoia of handing people my phone now, locked or unlocked. Back in late 2006, I was fresh out of high school and starting college life. Country girl in the big city and all on my own. I met people quickly, made a few friends, and got a job to support myself that took up most of my time. In no time at all, I was besieged by the plague of the mooch friend, the person who really needs you to cover the bills this month because insert new reason that makes you the jerk for not helping here. I was brand new to living on my own and thought they really needed my help, so I tightened my belt and worked harder and longer. Pretty soon, though, that was turning into me paying for everything and barely having food. It was about this time one of the people I had recently met started asking me to go on blind dates with a friend of theirs named Connor. I said no a few times, but when they said it would just be dinner and a movie and that Connor would pay, it really piqued my interest. I had been living off ramen noodles for weeks, and an actual meal and something to do other than work sounded really appealing. She swore up and down that Connor was so nice and so shy and so sweet, and it didn't have to be more than just one date. I asked her why such a great-sounding guy was getting set up on a blind date. At this, she faltered and said that he really seemed to have retreated into his shell since starting college, became hard to talk to, and had been all around odd lately. They thought a nice night out with someone would bring him back out of his shell and help him adjust to the enormous life change that is college. I reluctantly agreed, and she immediately set up a time that very night, as it was my first day off in a while and we didn't know when I would be free again. Connor responded that he would pick me up outside a local ice cream shop in his red car. This was important since I didn't have a cell phone, so that was how I would know it was him. I went to the ice cream shop, and after being 20 minutes late and starting to feel like I should just walk home, the car pulled up way too close and Connor stepped out. He was about 5'6", with a bowl cut, blonde hair, big round glasses, and a polo shirt. He ran around to my side and opened the door, placing a hand on the small of my back and telling me to get in quick or we would be late. My first red flag had popped up, but I just figured he was a jerk and was happy that I would only be around this guy for a few hours. We started driving, and he immediately started asking me questions and wanting to know all about me, and I was happy to oblige, as he was not really adding to the conversation and it felt awkward when no one was talking. I didn't say anything personal, mostly funny stories and anecdotes. I knew better than to give out all kinds of information to someone I just met. After a while, I realized I had no idea where we were. Not in the way you feel when you are in a new city and the streets become unfamiliar, but in a way that I was not sure anymore when the last time I saw streetlights and road signs was. I realized then that he kept talking to me as long as possible so I wouldn't notice where he was driving me. I was alone in a car with a guy I didn't know, driving who knows where with no phone and a bunch of roommates who probably wouldn't notice me missing until the bills were due. I felt like such an idiot, but I knew I had to berate myself after this was over and needed to get my head in the game now. I decided to play along like I was still oblivious and asked what movie we were seeing and what kind of food after and how he knew my friend who set up this date. Just lots of things to keep him talking and distracted while I was looking for a road sign and gently felt for the unlock button on the door. Suddenly, a sign popped up in the distance for a gas station, and I figured I could tuck and roll out of the door and run inside for help if I could just find the bottom to unlock the door. Just then, the car stopped and Connor threw it into park and jumped out just as someone else jumped into the back driver's seat. He shut the door and turned to the man in the back seat, which was great for me because I could now look for the button and unlock the door without him noticing. I found the button, quietly pushed it, and pulled the handle, hoping to do this as quietly as possible to maybe gain some ground to the gas station before they noticed me. I pulled. No response. I pushed on the door while pulling. No response. I checked the button again and tried again. No movement from the door. It was at this point I realized I wasn't getting out of this car unless it was from the driver's side. All the while this is going on, Connor is having a loud conversation with a guy who jumped in the back, who was apparently his drug dealer. Yeah, suddenly all that stuff about him acting weird since college made a very loud click, and from what I gathered as I was trying to open the door, Connor had developed quite the habit. Apparently he owed his drug dealer money for cocaine and was using me as leverage to hold on while he went and got the money. Luckily this was full of, "I swear I'm good for it, and I'll be back in a few minutes," repeated several times, and were loud enough to mask my fumbling with the door. Connor ran off into the darkness of the woods we parked next to, and it was just me and the dealer in the car. I stared straight ahead, so there would be no problems about me having seen his face later should it come up. We sat in silence for what felt like forever, and then he says, and I will never forget this, "Hey honey, want to go out back behind the gas station and blow me for some coke?" I was not sure what to say to this, so I went with my first response, which was high-pitched and musical. "No, thank you." To my unending luck, in this man's credit, he proceeded to bust a gut laughing, which made me laugh too. He then said, "Damn girl, you got like self-respect and shit." To which I once again didn't know how to respond, so I just shrugged and said, "I try, sir," which made him belt out a loud laugh again and we both ended up chuckling for a few minutes. He then asked, "What the hell is a chick like you doing with this guy?" I didn't know how to respond, and so far things had been going all right, so I just told him everything I told you. He even asked if I tried to jump out of the car when it stopped, as that would have been the sensible thing, and I told him I tried, but my door didn't seem to open from the inside, because at this point, what have we got to lose by lying? He then said something I really didn't think I would hear. He said he was sorry. Apparently, ever since college had started a few months ago, he had been going to the same one as Connor and was dealing on the side to make ends meet until he got his degree and didn't need to anymore. Connor was from a rich family and was one of his best clients at first, but spiraled into debt with him quickly and was hitting this stuff way too hard and fast. Connor was supposed to meet him here to give him the money he was owed, but when he got into the back seat, this guy jumped out of the front, made a million excuses about how the money was coming in just a few minutes, and had ran off into the woods with me still in the car. At this point, I had no idea what was going to happen next, and was about to ask how long we had been waiting, when a hushed argument and stomping sounds became evident from the woods in the direction Connor had ran off to. Out pops a much taller guy dragging Connor along to the car window and begins breathlessly apologizing for the actions of Connor. He said that Connor was an idiot and that this was a big mistake and handed the dealer something. I imagined money, as he said it was all there and a little extra, and that Connor would not be bothering him again. The tall guy opened the door for the dealer, who got out less than happy with these guys, but content with his money. At this point, the big dude introduces himself as this guy's roommate, Kyle. When Connor had come back to the apartment, it had popped a red flag, as he was way too cheerful for someone who had just left a few hours prior, shaking at the thought of paying off his dealer. After a little questioning, Connor said he had decided to pick up a girl and leave her in the car with the dealer to pay off his debts. Kyle was rather irate at this and wanted to know how exactly that was going to pay off anything and what exactly was wrong with him. Connor said you saw drug dealers that take chicks all the time on TV, so this must be a valid form of payment. Kyle then began to beat up Connor and demanded to be taken back to wherever he had dropped off the car right now, but not before making a stop at the ATM for the dealer's money. Connor protested, but Kyle smacked him around a bit until we saw the light and, after making a quick ATM stop, marched him through the woods back to the car to pay the dealer and get me home. He told me this while repeatedly hitting Connor in the back of the head as he drove me back to the city, exclaiming things, "Whatever made you think kidnapping some girl was a good idea?" And, "Did you think you would just magically never see your dealer again? You have class with him on Monday, dude." He then made Connor apologize as well, and we sat in silence for a while as I wondered how I ever, in a million years, got lucky enough to get kidnapped by a complete idiot who had the nicest drug dealer on the planet and a roommate that doubled as an aggressive Jiminy Cricket. They dropped me off as soon as we hit downtown, as I didn't want them to know where I lived. I thanked Kyle profusely as I got out, and he said it would be all good if I promised to never go to the cops about it, since they had futures and whatnot. I had no problem. They drove off, and I walked home to eat my ramen and never, under any circumstances, let myself end up like that again. So this happened in 2013. This kid named Johnny moved in next door to me when he was around 12. And for lack of a better term, this kid was pretty much a pussy. I remember one time he fell on his skateboard and didn't land hard at all and was crying his little heart out in my driveway when he was like 16. So fast forward when this kid was like 18. By then I'm selling coke and molly pretty heavily, and he's one of my best customers. but now he's hanging out with some pretty shady people, which my parents obviously aren't fans of. My parents also didn't know I was ever selling anything because I was pretty good at keeping it under wraps. Johnny was clearly a follower. He went from skater/emo type to some wannabe thug which he just wasn't built for. So my parents go to the Outer Banks, North Carolina every year for 2 weeks and ask if I'll come stay at the house while they are gone, which I was excited about because their house is much better than the shitty little one-bedroom apartment I had at the time. So everything was going fine at the house. I had my on and off again girlfriend over all that time, and there was quite a bit of drugs and alcohol going on. I was far from a saint back then. I'll never forget it. It was a Thursday night, and my girlfriend had just left a few hours ago. I should say earlier that day, Johnny had seen me out front of my parents and had asked for a front. I told him no, considering I never fronted anyone, and in all honesty had been using too much of my own shit so couldn't afford it. He didn't like that very much, and we got in an argument, and I pretty much punked him in front of all of his little friends. So by now it's like 2 in the morning, and I'm obviously nowhere near tired because of all the coke and Molly. I'm sitting in the dark watching Netflix in this den/side living room my parents had in the downstairs, which has a window going outside which I had open. I had paused the TV and was on my phone texting and on Facebook when I hear something. It's the screen of my window slowly being slid up, and I know the sound. I had snuck in and out of this house numerous times growing up. So I slowly get up and watch the window. I clearly see the screen moving very slowly up through the curtains. So I walk up to the window, and as soon as I move the curtain, at least 3 or 4 people scatter. I run out front, but they are booking it down the street. I knew it was that Johnny kid and his friends. I didn't see them, but I knew it was those shitheads. I didn't call the cops or nothing because I wasn't exactly living on the right side of the law. So I just go back and lock everything up, and the rest of the week goes smooth. I never told my parents about it, and I also never seen Johnny again. Called him a few times, which he never answered. I even offered to front him, which was bullshit. I just wanted to see him. But he didn't reply, which was all the more reason to know it was him, and he knew that I knew. So a month goes by, and I'm watching the news, and Johnny is on it for murder, which blows my mind. Him and his 3 friends went out of town, broke into some old couple's home, beat them up, tied them up, and then stabbed them. Then they burnt the house down after robbing it. They all ended up ratting on each other, and he got sentenced to 35 years for testifying against his co-defendants. Makes me wonder, if I was still asleep, what would have happened if they got in? Led into the garage and basement. When you walk out of the bedroom and turn, you can see all the way across the house, kitchen, living room, dining area, to the door of my parents' bedroom and the stairs leading up from the basement. It had been a couple of days since my parents left, and I hadn't had any problems. They had sent me a couple messages on Facebook, letting me know they had arrived to their friend's house safely and were having a good time. The day had gone well, and I was sure to check that I'd locked all the doors of the house once the sun started going down. It was about 11 p.m., and I was doing my nightly routine of laying in bed and messaging around on the computer when I suddenly got this sinking feeling of dread. I felt as if I was being watched. It was summer and we didn't have AC, so I had a large box fan in the window blowing the cool night air into my stiffly hot room. But once that feeling settled over me, I decided I should remove the fan and close the window, just in case. Once removing the fan, shutting and locking the window, and pulling down the curtain, I felt a bit better. However, I still couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I lay back in bed and tried to continue what I was doing, though I didn't put my headphones back on. After a few minutes, I began to hear something that sounded like light scratching. I sat still in bed, listening to the sound, trying to pinpoint what it was if I recognized it at all. Our new house, although relatively close in distance to our neighbors, had a fair amount of forest around it, so I thought the scratching may have been an animal. The worse it would be for me. I contemplated popping the screen out of the bedroom window and jumping out, but it was far enough off the ground that there was a good chance I would end up getting hurt if I did. Not to mention that if I jumped out of the window and hurt myself, I wouldn't be able to run for help, and I would be right next to the door that whoever was in my house had gone through. So, I decided to very carefully and quietly open my door and peek out around the corner, and if the coast was clear, I would make a mad dash for the front door and sprint to my neighbor's house. I very slowly opened my bedroom door, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness of the house before creeping around the corner and looking to see if I was safe to make a run for it. What I saw nearly made. To give some background information, this event occurred a little over a year ago, and I still haven't been able to even begin to get over it. I'm a 22-year-old, 5'4" female, and at the time I was 21. My family and I had recently moved to a new town that was a fair amount more rural than the town I had previously lived in, and our new home was a large ranch-style house with a basement. I was home from college, and my parents had left for the week to celebrate their wedding anniversary with their friends who lived several hours away. Before I continue, I'll give a quick layout of the house so that you'll be able to imagine the setting a bit more clearly. There were 3 doors which led into the house, one on the front porch, a sliding glass door on the back porch, and another door on the other side of the wall from my bedroom, which was someone's dog that got loose and wanted to come inside. After a few minutes, the scratching stopped, and everything returned to silence. So, I figured that I was probably right, and that it must have been an animal or something. My relief was short-lived. As soon after the scratching stopped, from the other side of the wall I began to hear slow footsteps descending into the basement. This is when I knew I was completely fucked. There was no way I could get out of the house without walking past the basement stairs. We didn't have a house phone, and at the time I was in the process of getting a new cell phone because mine was broken beyond repair. I sat there for a few seconds wondering what the hell I should do. I knew that I would need to get out of the house as soon as possible, and that the more time I wasted,